Caught my wife cheating, moved on, and found new love. Until my ex tried to burn everything down. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Daniel Miller. I'm in my mid-30s, and for years I thought I had the perfect life. I worked hard, took care of my wife Jessica, and trusted the people closest to me. Jessica was 32, beautiful, charming, and everyone thought she was the kind of woman a man would be lucky to have. I believed that too, until one night proved me wrong. I had been away on a short work trip, nothing unusual, but things wrapped up earlier than expected, so I drove home late that evening, excited to surprise her. It was past midnight when I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The lights were dim, and I remember thinking the house felt too quiet. Then I heard it, a laugh. A man's laugh. I froze. At first, I told myself maybe Jessica had the TV on, or maybe a neighbor stopped by. But deep down, my gut knew the truth. I followed the sound, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. When I pushed open the bedroom door, the sight burned into me forever. Jessica was in bed, with Ryan Carter, my so-called best friend. The room went silent when they saw me. Jessica's eyes widened, her face drained of color, and Ryan scrambled to cover himself. I stood there, gripping the doorknob so tight my hand hurt. My whole world collapsed in a single instant. Jessica opened her mouth, stammering some excuse, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't shout, didn't throw things, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I took a long breath, turned around, and walked out. Every step felt heavy, like I was leaving behind not just my wife, but the man I thought I was. I drove aimlessly for hours that night. Anger, shame, heartbreak, they all mixed together until I felt hollow. But even in that moment of pain, one thought was clear. I wouldn't let this betrayal break me. I wasn't going to destroy myself over two people who clearly never valued me. No, I was going to handle this differently. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. I wasn't going to scream or beg or fight to hold on to something that was already rotten. I was going to walk away and let them deal with the mess they created. Jessica thought she had won something by sneaking around with Ryan, but what she didn't know was that she had already lost me. That night changed everything. It was the end of my marriage, the end of my friendship, and the end of the life I thought I had. But it was also the beginning of something else, something I never expected. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, but inside the house the air felt colder than ever. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Jessica eventually walked in, wearing a robe like nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee, her eyes sliding past him as if he were invisible. He finally spoke, his voice steady but sharp. I saw everything last night. Her hand froze on the cup, but instead of guilt, she smirked faintly. You're making it sound worse than it was. Daniel, you've been so dull lately. Always working, always serious. I just needed excitement. The words cut deeper than any excuse. She didn't even try to deny it. Moments later, Ryan appeared, awkwardly buttoning his shirt. He avoided Daniel's eyes. Look, man, it just happened. We didn't plan it. Daniel's jaw tightened. Don't insult me. You both made choices. The silence after that was heavy. He looked at Jessica, the woman he once trusted more than anyone. There was nothing left between them now. Only betrayal standing in the space where love used to live. I'll call a lawyer today, Daniel said flatly. Jessica blinked, caught off guard. Wait, what? You're not even going to talk this through. You already did the talking, he replied, standing. With him. Her confidence cracked. She had expected anger, maybe tears, maybe even desperate pleading. But not this. Not him walking away with finality. Upstairs, Daniel opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Piece by piece, he folded his shirts, jeans, socks, packing as if he were preparing for a long trip he'd never return from. Each sound of the zipper, each drawer shutting, was like closing a chapter for good. On the dresser sat a framed photo from their wedding day, her in white, him in a suit, both smiling like the world was theirs. Daniel lifted it slowly, staring at the frozen happiness. For a moment his chest tightened, grief rising like a wave. Then he set his jaw, opened the trash bin, and dropped the photo in without hesitation. The hollow thud echoed louder than any argument could have. He closed the suitcase, carried it downstairs, and walked past Jessica without another word. She called after him, her tone shifting from smug to panicked, but he didn't turn back. The vows they once made meant nothing now. The marriage had ended long before he caught them. It just took last night to finally show him the truth. When he stepped outside, the morning air hit his face, cool and sharp. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of finality. What he had built with her was gone, but he refused to cling to ashes. He wasn't leaving as a broken man. He was leaving as someone ready to start again, even if he didn't know where that path would lead. The papers were signed, stamped, and handed back across the table. Just like that, Years of marriage were reduced to a few signatures. Daniel walked out of the courthouse with a manila envelope under his arm and nothing else to his name but a battered suitcase and the echo of promises that had meant nothing. His new place was a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The walls were bare, the carpet stained, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound to fill the silence. At night, Daniel would sit on the couch with a glass in his hand, staring at the ceiling as whiskey burned down his throat. The loneliness pressed against him like a heavy weight, making every hour drag. There were no calls, no laughter, no warmth waiting for him, just the creak of old pipes and the distant traffic outside. He told himself he should be relieved to be free, but freedom felt more like exile. The emptiness gnawed at him, and the only thing that dulled it was another pour from the bottle. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel forced himself out for groceries. He turned the corner of Main Street, and there she was, Jessica, dressed to draw attention, holding Ryan's arm like a trophy. They laughed too loudly, kissed too long, and made sure everyone could see. For a moment, Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. Ryan noticed him first. His smirk carried no shame, only arrogance. Jessica followed his gaze and locked eyes with Daniel. Instead of guilt, she flashed a smile as if to say, "Look what I have now." Shoppers passed by, some recognizing them, whispering. Heat crawled up Daniel's neck as humiliation spread through him. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He walked past them, shoulders straight, but inside he was burning. Every memory, every ounce of trust he had once given them, twisted into a knife. He could hear their laughter behind him as he pushed open the store door, but he refused to look back. That night, Daniel sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the bottle half empty beside him. He replayed the scene again and again, each time the sting sharper than before. They wanted him to feel small. They wanted him broken. He set the glass down and leaned forward, his voice low, steady, and colder than he had ever heard himself sound. "You're going to regret this." The words weren't shouted. They weren't for anyone else's ears. They were a promise, whispered into the silence of his apartment. A vow not to crumble, not to stay on the floor where they had left him. Outside, the city moved on without him, but inside that small, empty room, Daniel's resolve began to form. He would endure the loneliness, the bitterness, the nights of silence. And when the time came, Jessica and Ryan would learn just how wrong they had been to think he was finished. The evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that usually wrapped Daniel in loneliness, until a sharp metallic clang echoed from the parking lot below his apartment. Curious, he stepped outside and found a young woman crouched beside a small sedan, frowning at a useless tire iron. "Need a hand?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. She looked up, brushing hair from her face. "Unless you've got superhuman strength, I'd say yes." Her smile was quick, not forced, and her eyes carried a spark of humor even in the middle of frustration. Daniel knelt beside her, taking the tool. "I can't promise superhuman, but I've changed a few flats in my day." As he loosened the bolts, she leaned against the car, arms crossed. "Well, you're already ahead of me. I was about to just sit here and hope it magically fixed itself." He chuckled, surprised at how easily she drew laughter out of him. "Not the most reliable plan." "Hey, I'm a nurse," she shot back playful. "I fix people, not cars." When the spare was finally on, she extended her hand. "Emily Turner. And before you ask, yes, I owe you one." Daniel shook her hand. "Daniel. And no, you don't owe me anything. Just don't wait for magic next time." Her laugh rang genuine, light in a way he hadn't heard in years. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed again. Coffee in the lobby, short chats by the mailboxes, then longer conversations that stretched into easy hours. Where his past relationship had felt heavy, every word with Emily carried ease. She teased him for his quiet nature, nudged him out of his guarded shell, and never once made him feel lesser for the shadows he carried. She told stories from long shifts at the hospital, chaotic nights, difficult patients, small victories that made the exhaustion worth it. Daniel found himself listening, not out of politeness, but because he wanted to hear every word. He noticed how she cared deeply, not just for strangers in hospital beds, but for anyone who crossed her path. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel like he was dragging himself through life. Sitting across from her at a diner booth, watching her animatedly describe the worst cafeteria food she'd ever eaten, he felt something loosen inside him. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a grand moment. It was gradual, like light slowly filling a dark room. Emily didn't try to fix him, didn't press him for more than he could give. She simply showed up with honesty and warmth, and that was enough. When he returned to his apartment at night, the silence wasn't so heavy anymore. He caught himself smiling at the memory of her laughter, the way she rolled her eyes at his dry jokes. Somewhere between flat tires and coffee cups, Daniel realized he was beginning to heal. Not because he forgot the past, but because Emily reminded him there was still something worth reaching for. Their connection grew in ways Daniel hadn't expected. What began as small exchanges turned into evenings together. Quiet dinners, long drives, and conversations that stretched until neither wanted the night to end. With Emily, the hours didn't drag. They slipped by unnoticed, filled with lightness he hadn't felt in years. She had a way of asking questions that weren't intrusive, but opened doors he thought he'd locked forever. One evening, sitting on a bench by the river, she tilted her head and said softly, "You don't talk much about your past. Why is that?" Daniel hesitated, his hands clasped. "Because most of it feels like something I buried." He paused, then added, "But maybe it's time to stop burying it." Under the fading sky, he finally told her the truth. The broken marriage, the betrayal, the friend who had cut deeper than an enemy ever could. His voice stayed steady, though the memories still scraped at him. Emily didn't gasp, didn't flood him with sympathy. She listened, her expression calm but serious. When he finished, she reached for his hand. "You walked away instead of destroying yourself over it. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's strength most people don't have." Her words settled in him, not as comfort but as something firmer, something that reminded him he wasn't just surviving, he was rebuilding. Their bond deepened. They shared laughter over burnt pancakes in her kitchen, quiet moments watching old movies, even silly debates about which diner served the best pie. Each memory layered over the wounds he carried, not erasing them but softening the edges. The true test came when Emily invited him to meet her family. Daniel almost said no, memories of strained dinners with Jessica's parents still sharp. They had always treated him like an outsider, judging every word, every gesture, making him feel unwelcome in his own marriage. But he agreed, nervous as he drove to a modest suburban home. The door opened to warmth, her mother's embrace, her father's firm handshake, siblings who cracked jokes before the introductions were even done. Dinner was noisy, filled with teasing and laughter, but none of it at his expense. When Emily slipped her hand into his under the table, Daniel realized he wasn't just tolerated here, he belonged. On the drive back, she asked with a grin, "So, how'd you survive them?" Daniel smiled, the tension finally gone from his shoulders. "Survive? I think I actually enjoyed myself." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder as the traffic lights painted fleeting colors across the windshield. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, Daniel felt more than relief. He felt love, steady and real. Not the kind that demanded, not the kind that suffocated, but the kind that healed. Emily wasn't filling a void left behind. She was showing him a future that could exist beyond it. A knock rattled the door late one evening. Daniel wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, the last face he wanted to see was standing there. Jessica, dressed sharp as ever, her lipstick too bright, eyes glinting with something that wasn't warm. Without waiting for an invitation, she pushed her way inside, scanning the room like she owned it. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, her tone half mocking, half bitter. Daniel crossed his arms. "Why are you here, Jessica?" She turned, leaning against the counter as if it were still her home. "I heard you've been seeing someone. A nurse, right? Cute. But let's be honest, Daniel, you're mine. Always have been." Her confidence was the same as the morning he'd walked out, but now it came laced with jealousy. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You can't just replace me with some girl who doesn't even know you like I do." Daniel held his ground. "You lost that right the moment you chose him. Whatever you think this is, it's over. You don't get to walk back in and claim me." For a second, the mask slipped. Her jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. "You think she's better than me? She doesn't understand what you need. She doesn't have what I have." Daniel shook his head slowly. "What you had was a chance, and you threw it away." The silence stretched. Jessica's gaze darted around the apartment, landing on a coffee mug left on the table, clearly not his. A sly smile crept onto her lips. "So she's been here. That didn't take long." Daniel stepped forward, blocking her line of sight. "Leave, Jessica." She lingered, smirking as if she'd discovered a weapon she could use. "You always were stubborn. Fine. But don't think this little fairy tale is going to last. She won't be able to handle what comes with you. I'll make sure of that." Her words dripped with venom, but her tone was smooth, calculated. She wasn't yelling, wasn't begging. She was plotting. Finally, Daniel opened the door wide. "Out!" Jessica met his stare one last time before strutting past him, her perfume lingering in the air long after the click of her heels faded down the hall. When the door shut, Daniel leaned against it, fists clenched. He knew her well enough to recognize that look. Jessica wasn't finished. She had no intention of letting him move forward in peace. Her visit wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. And the way she smiled on her way out told him she'd already decided how to stir the chaos next. Whispers began circling long before Daniel heard them directly. A coworker mentioned something in passing, then a neighbor dropped a pointed comment. The story went like this. Daniel hadn't left Jessica because of betrayal. He had left her because of another woman. Supposedly, Emily had been involved all along. Daniel knew instantly where it came from. Jessica's fingerprints were all over it. She couldn't stand being forgotten, so she twisted the narrative to paint herself as the victim. And the worst part was how easily some people believed it. Ryan, once smug at her side, now looked uneasy whenever their paths crossed. He caught Daniel outside a hardware store one afternoon, his expression tight. She said Emily was the reason, but I don't buy it. I'm starting to see she hasn't changed at all. His words were clipped bitter. For the first time, Ryan seemed less like a rival and more like another casualty of Jessica's game. Meanwhile, Jessica's own tactics grew bolder. One night she called Daniel out of the blue, her voice soft, almost trembling. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have chosen him. I want us back. Her sudden vulnerability might have swayed someone else, but Daniel recognized Jessica, the only mistake was me ever trusting you. Don't call again. He hung up before she could spin more lies. But while Daniel kept his stance firm, Emily struggled. The rumors followed her like shadows. At the hospital, co-workers asked subtle questions. At restaurants, strangers looked a little too long. One evening, sitting across from Daniel at the diner they loved, she finally spoke what she had been holding in. People keep saying I broke up your marriage. Her voice shook with frustration. I know it's not true. You know it's not true. But does it ever end? Or am I always going to live under the weight of what she did? Daniel reached across the table, steadying her trembling hand. She wants you to doubt us. That's the only weapon she has left. But she doesn't own my future, and she sure as hell doesn't own yours. Emily searched his face, torn between love and fear. I believe you, Daniel. I do. But believing doesn't make the noise stop. Her words struck deep because he couldn't deny them. Jessica had poisoned the air around them, and no matter how firm Daniel stood, Emily still had to breathe it in. That night, as he lay awake, he realized Jessica's sabotage wasn't just about revenge. It was about eroding trust, piece by piece. And though he held strong, Emily's unease proved the damage was working. If Jessica kept pushing, she might succeed in tearing apart the very thing Daniel had begun to rebuild. It started on an ordinary afternoon at the office. Phones rang, papers shuffled, the usual rhythm of work, until the glass doors burst open. Jessica stormed inside, her voice carrying across the lobby. Daniel, we need to talk. Heads turned. Colleagues froze, whispering. Daniel's stomach dropped as she marched straight toward him, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. She didn't care about the audience. She wanted one. You can't just erase me, she shouted, standing inches from his desk. Everyone here should know. You're not who you pretend to be. Daniel rose slowly, jaw tight. This is neither the time nor the place. Leave. But she wouldn't. She hurled accusations, twisting facts, painting herself as wrong. The security guard finally escorted her out, but not before she promised to finish what she started. The office buzzed with uneasy silence long after she was gone. That night, Ryan showed up at Daniel's door, looking defeated. His usual swagger had vanished. I'm done with her, he muttered. Caught her lying again. About you, about me, about everything. His voice carried exhaustion, like a man who'd finally realized he was clinging to poison. Without another word, he walked away, leaving Daniel to wonder how long Ryan had been trapped in her web. Jessica, however, didn't retreat. Losing Ryan only made her more erratic. She called at all hours, left notes under Daniel's door, and once even followed him home from work. Her obsession no longer hid behind charm. It burned openly, raw and unstable. The pressure began weighing on Emily. One evening she stood by the window of Daniel's apartment, arms crossed tightly. I can't keep living like this. Everywhere we go, she's there. Everything we build, she tries to tear down. Daniel's chest tightened. Emily, please, don't let her win. That's what she wants, to make you walk away. She turned, eyes wet with frustration. Then tell me why I shouldn't. He stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. Because what we have is real. She can't touch that unless we let her. Don't let her dictate our story. Emily hesitated, searching his face, then finally nodded. But Daniel saw the doubt lingering in her eyes, the strain Jessica had carved into their lives. When the door closed behind her that night, Daniel sat in the dark, fists clenched. He couldn't keep waiting for Jessica's next stunt. The chaos wouldn't end on its own. For the first time, he understood. Avoidance was no longer enough. If he wanted peace, if he wanted a future with Emily, he'd have to face Jessica directly. Not with anger, not with despair, but with finality. The war she had started would only end when he ended it himself. Daniel began documenting everything. Every late-night call, every note slipped under his door, every time she appeared uninvited. He saved it all. Dates, times, recordings, even witnesses who had seen her outbursts. Piece by piece, he built a record of her harassment. For once, he wasn't reacting to her chaos. He was preparing to end it. When he brought the evidence to a lawyer, the man flipped through the stack with raised brows. You've got more than enough. We'll file for a restraining order immediately. The day in court came sooner than Daniel expected. The room smelled faintly of old wood and tension. Jessica strutted in, still dressed like she was heading to a party, her smile wide and insincere. But when the judge called for order, that smile wavered. Daniel's lawyer presented the evidence methodically: phone logs, written notes, eyewitness accounts. One by one, the pieces painted a picture of obsession and harassment that couldn't be denied. Jessica tried to interrupt, scoffing, rolling her eyes, but each display only dug her deep. The turning point came when Ryan was called to the stand. He avoided looking at her as he spoke. She lied to me about everything. About him, about why their marriage ended, even about where she was going. I stayed quiet too long, but I can't anymore. She hasn't stopped harassing him since the divorce. His voice carried no sympathy, just resignation. Jessica's face twisted, her charm stripped away under the fluorescent lights. She muttered denials, but they sounded weaker with each passing minute. The more she tried to defend herself, the clearer her desperation became. When the judge finally granted the restraining order, the gavel hit with a sound that felt like release. Jessica's expression turned venomous, her composure cracking as reality sank in. Power had slipped from her grasp, and for the first time, she couldn't twist the story in her favor. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The victory wasn't about humiliating her. It was about reclaiming his life. He rose from his seat, Emily's hand finding his as they walked toward the exit together. Behind them, Jessica seethed, her whispered curses drowned out by the shuffle of papers and the murmur of the court. She had been exposed in full daylight, her schemes laid bare, and there was nothing she could do to claw back control. Stepping into the crisp air outside, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. The battle wasn't just won in the legal sense, it was won in his heart. He had faced the storm without losing himself, and now he could finally move forward, not as a man haunted by betrayal, but as someone free. Emily squeezed his hand, smiling softly. For the first time, Daniel believed the worst was truly behind him. When the judge finally granted the restraining order, the gavel hit with a sound that felt like relief. Jessica's expression turned venomous, her composure cracking as reality sank in. Power had slipped from her grasp, and for the first time, she couldn't twist the story in her favor. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The victory wasn't about humiliating her. It was about reclaiming his life. He rose from his seat, Emily's hand finding his as they walked toward the exit together. Behind them, Jessica seethed, her whispered curses drowned out by the shuffle of papers and the murmur of the court. She had been exposed in full daylight, her schemes laid bare, and there was nothing she could do to claw back control. Stepping into the crisp air outside, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. The battle wasn't just won in the legal sense, it was won in his heart. He had faced the storm without losing himself, and now he could finally move forward, not as a man haunted by betrayal, but as someone free. Emily squeezed his hand, smiling softly. For the first time, Daniel believed the worst was truly behind him. The evening was calm, the sky painted in fading shades of gold and purple. Daniel led Emily to the small park where they had shared their first long walk together. The bench where they'd once sat, talking until the stars appeared, waited like a silent witness to how far they had come. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. No grand gestures, no crowd, no champagne. Just the two of them under the quiet canopy of trees. He turned toward her, his voice unsteady but full of certainty. Emily, I don't want big lights or a perfect script. I just want you. Every day, for the rest of my life. He opened the small box, revealing a simple ring. Nothing extravagant, but it shone with the sincerity behind it. Emily's breath caught. For a moment she just stared, her eyes glistening, before whispering, yes. 1,000 times yes. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she laughed, pulling him into her arms. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to pause around them. No shadows of the past, no voices of doubt, just the quiet promise of a future built on trust and love. They walked home hand in hand, hearts light, steps steady. For Daniel, it was more than an engagement. It was proof that the broken man who once sat alone in a dark apartment was gone. In his place stood someone who had endured betrayal, faced chaos, and still found the courage to love again. Later, as they stood on the balcony of his apartment, Daniel let his gaze drift over the city lights. The memories of pain and loss were still there, but now they felt distant, like echoes fading into the night. Emily leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and he realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. But somewhere, not far away, another set of eyes watched. Jessica lingered in the shadows near the street, her arms crossed, her lips curled into a bitter smile. She saw the way Emily's ring sparkled under the light, saw the way Daniel held her close. Softly, almost to herself, she muttered, "This isn't over." The words hung in the darkness, a chilling reminder that some wounds never heal for those who refuse to let go. Daniel and Emily, lost in their own joy, didn't see her standing there. They only knew the warmth of each other's presence, believing the past had finally been laid to rest. For Daniel, betrayal had once torn everything apart. Now love had stitched it back together. Whether or not Jessica lurked in the background, he had chosen his path, and this time, it was one no one could take from him. Do you think I made the right choice walking away, or should I have tried to forgive them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.